In 1999, a woman named Fan Man Yi was in her apartment when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was met by 3 men and a teenage girl. Before she could react, they forced their way in and kidnapped her. They brought her to their apartment. But this wasn't just any apartment. The entire place was covered in Hello Kitty merchandise. Plush toys, posters, bed sheets. It looked like a child's room hiding something much darker. For nearly a month, Fan was held captive and subjected to horrifying torture. She was beaten with metal bars and burned with hot candle wax until she couldn't walk. She was starved, humiliated, and completely isolated. Eventually, her body gave out. Fan Man Yi died from the abuse. But even in death, the horror continued. Her body was dismembered, and parts of her remains were stuffed inside a large Hello Kitty doll, left to rot, crawling with insects. Weeks later, the teenage girl, overwhelmed with guilt, went to the police. That confession led to the arrest of all 3 men. They were sentenced to life in prison, not for murder, but for manslaughter, since the exact cause of death couldn't be proven. The case became known as the Hello Kitty murder, and it remains one of the most horrifying crimes in Hong Kong's history.
Would you kill your best friend for $9 million? In 2019, Denali Brimmer met a millionaire online named Tyler who offered her $9 million in exchange for evidence of her killing someone. Denali, who was 18 at the time, recruited 4 other teens to help her lure her friend Cynthia Hoffman to Thunderbird Falls in Alaska. Under the guise of a hiking trip, they then shot her in the back of the head and dumped her body in the river. She sent photos and videos of the crime but never received any money. That's because Tyler never existed. His real name was Darren Chill Miller, a 21-year-old from Indiana. He then blackmailed Denali into sexually assaulting young girls, which led to her arrest and the discovery of evidence on her phone linking her to Cynthia's murder. On February 15th, she pled guilty to first-degree murder and now faces up to 99 years in prison.
Sorry, they expect us to believe that that was a self-unaliving. She had 20 stab wounds, some in the back of her head and neck. It was a freezing cold day in 2011 in Philadelphia. Ellen Greenberg was a 27-year-old first grade teacher, and she really was an amazing woman. She was super intelligent and she was stunning too, as you can see. She lived in Manayunk with her fiance Samuel Goldberg. On the day that tragedy struck, there was actually a huge snowstorm, so Ellen had to go home early from work, and she stopped for petrol really quickly at 1:30 p.m. and then got home. Her fiance said that he went off to the gym just before 5 p.m. and I believe that this was a gym not far away, maybe even in the same building, and when he got back he said he found a horrific scene. Weirdly, at first he couldn't actually get into the apartment because he said that it was closed from the inside. It had apparently been like latched and he couldn't get in at first. He texted her things like, "Hello, open the door, and you better have an excuse." He said he eventually finally managed to break down the door and he found her dead body lying on the floor. He immediately called 911 and said there's blood everywhere. He said he couldn't tell what happened. He seemed confused on the phone. He said maybe she'd fell and fallen, but she was bleeding from her head. My first instinct would be she's been murdered and there's somebody hiding. He then seemed very surprised and shouted, "Oh my god, she'd stabbed herself." That wouldn't be my initial reaction. He said there's a knife sticking out of her heart, and then he was like, maybe she fell on it. When paramedics got there, it was absolutely horrific. She'd been stabbed 20 times. And from the start, this was extremely controversial. Nothing seemed to make sense. It definitely didn't seem like it was a self-unaliving, but if the door was shut from the inside, how could anybody have even gotten in? My gut instinct is just that there would be no way that somebody would be able to do this to themselves. Stab wounds were so deep and brutal and in positions that I feel would just be impossible to inflict on yourself. One was deeply in her spine. Weirdly, investigators only found her DNA on herself and on the knife. She had no defensive wounds, indicating that there wasn't a struggle. But interestingly, she did have bruises all over her body in sort of various stages of healing. Like I said, there weren't any signs initially reported of forced entry other than obviously where the fiance had to break in. But could she have been expecting somebody? Could she have voluntarily let somebody in thinking that it was her fiance? Some people claim that because she went to the doctor about anxiety, that meant that she was depressed and she would have self-unalived, but like, I've been to the doctor for anxiety previously, and I wouldn't do that. She hadn't searched online about methods, she hadn't left a note, and her parents are convinced this was a murder, and so am I. One of her wounds even appeared to have happened after her heart stopped because there was no blood in one of the wounds on her neck. Her death at first was ruled a homicide, but then it was very quickly changed to self-unaliving, and this caused absolute uproar. It just seems wild to me. But then, very, very recently, the original medical examiner signed a statement saying that her death should be designated as something other than self-unaliving. And so many other experts have said this too. They've said, like, this defies common sense. However, the latest ruling again determines it as self-unaliving, even as they now believe her total number of injuries were actually 23 and 31 bruises. How are we supposed to believe that she did this to herself? Guys, let me know what you think in the comments. What are your theories? Because this just absolutely makes no sense to me.
His wife tried to kill him 7 times. Tony and Frances Toto had 4 kids in a pizza shop together, but in 1983 they had a self-proclaimed rough time. That's because Tony was having multiple affairs, and when Frances found out, she decided to kill him, and she hired 2 teenage hitmen to help her. But when attempting to blow up his car and attacking him with a baseball bat didn't work, Frances put a bottle of sleeping pills in her husband's food, and the hitmen shot him twice, but he still didn't die. And though she spent 4 years in prison and he still has a bullet in his head, in 2023 they're celebrating 57 years of marriage.
Every once in a while, when I'm trying to go to sleep, my brain makes me think of the creepiest unsolved murders and disappearances, and usually it's always this one. On June 11, 2005, Todd Geib seemingly vanished into thin air from an all-night keg party, but 22 days later, his body was found standing upright in a private lake that had already been previously searched. Police say that he must have just drowned, but no water was found in his lungs, and evidence suggests that he had only been dead for a few days before being found. This is one of those cases where it feels like something really sinister happened, yet police refuse to fully investigate. I've talked about this case on here a few times, so you might be sick of hearing about it from me, but it's constantly on my mind because his mom deserves answers. So let's talk about it. This is Todd Geib. He was 22 years old when he mysteriously disappeared and died in 2005. At around 9:30 p.m. on June 11th, 2005, Todd and his friends left a restaurant to go to an all-night keg party that was being held in an apple orchard in Casnovia, Michigan. As the night went on, things started to get really rowdy, so Todd decided to leave the party at 12:45 a.m. and walk back to his apartment, which was only about 1.5 miles away. Doing so, he called his friend to tell him that he was on his way back home. Over the next 10 minutes, Todd made a series of bizarre phone calls. At one point, he called a friend and said, quote, "I'm in a field," end quote, before the call ended. But to get back to his apartment, he shouldn't have been anywhere close to a field. The friend called back and Todd picked up, but all they could hear was what sounded like heavy breathing, and then the call cut out. No other calls went through after this, and his phone was never used again. This was the last time anyone ever heard from Todd. He was soon reported missing, and an extensive search was launched involving more than 1,500 volunteers and police officers. Authorities even searched by air, combing through the orchard and everything around it, including the stretch of road that he would have taken to get home. Authorities brought in bloodhounds, which tracked Todd's scent up until the start of the road that he would have taken to get home, but it ended there. It seemed like Todd vanished into thin air. But 22 days later, his body was found in a private lake just 2 miles from his home, right in the middle of an area that had already been thoroughly searched. But what was really odd was the way Todd's body was found. His body was found standing upright in the water with his head and shoulders above the surface. Nothing was weighing him down, and he had no external injuries. His remains only had very little decomposition, and his clothing appeared to be completely clean of debris, sand, and algae. He also didn't have any insects in or on his body, which is unusual if somebody was actually in the water for 21 days. A group of former NYPD detectives named Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and Michael Donovan, and Todd's mom had an independent investigation conducted. And from that, they learned that while Todd had been missing for 3 weeks, he had actually only been dead for 2 to 5 days before being found. The autopsy report also showed no water in Todd's lungs at all. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believe that Todd was abducted, held on land for a period of time, murdered, and then placed in the water after death shortly before being found. Adding to the mystery of this case is the fact that on top of alcohol being found in his system, he also showed traces of these 2 antidepressants, but oddly enough, he was never prescribed those. The pharmacist working on this case stated that those two pills would normally never be given together because if they were, it would likely cause confusion and hallucinations. They agreed that both the pills and the alcohol found in his system would have left him incapacitated and definitely unable to get to the lake by himself. Despite all of this evidence, the Michigan State Police ultimately ruled Todd's cause of death as undetermined drowning. They believe that Todd left the party intoxicated and just accidentally drowned in the lake despite no water being found in his lungs. But Todd's mom and Kevin, Anthony, and Michael do not believe this. So the former NYPD detective started working with a forensic biologist that decided to test if Todd was actually in the lake for 3 weeks, like police say. Together they placed pig carcasses, which are reportedly very similar to human bodies in terms of decomposition, into a pond for 3 weeks dressed in clothing that resembled Todd's outfit. The carcasses collected aquatic insects within the first day, and by day 3, the insects had laid eggs. By day 21, the carcasses completely collapsed from the insect activity, and the clothes were covered in algae. This test proved that it's extremely unlikely that Todd's body was in the lake for those 22 days. So they gave all of this information to the Michigan State Police in hopes they would reopen and reinvestigate the case, but nothing has ever come of it. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believe that Todd is a possible victim of the smiley face killers. The smiley face killer is a theory, emphasis on theory, of an alleged network of serial killers that targets college-aged men and dumps their bodies in nearby waterways. They then leave graffiti smiley faces at the death sites. This is really controversial, but I figured I'd add this in because multiple people came forward and stated that they saw smiley face spray painted on a tree near where Todd's body was found. A card with a smiley face on it was also found on his grave. Todd's own mom even believes that he could be a possible victim of the smiley face killers, but the Michigan State Police refused to look deeper into this case. So as of today, Todd's case sits closed with an outcome that doesn't seem likely. Todd's mom, Kathy, has tirelessly fought for the Michigan State Police to reopen her son's case and to properly reinvestigate, but so far it seems like this case is just not being taken seriously. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of talking with her, and with her blessing, I created this petition to hopefully get the case reopened. It would mean the world to me if you could sign it, or at the very least, share it and his story. But it's now been 20 years, and whatever happened to Todd that night in the orchard remains a mystery.
This is likely the worst acting in police body cam footage history.
Husband, he went to go help me. My Jeep is stuck in the back around the corner, and he's been shot in the head, please. There was a man. There's a tall person. That's all I know. I was sitting right at the back of it, and I went to go get, and I heard a shot. And the Jeep started rolling, and I didn't see anything, and I saw a shadow. That's all I saw.
Robert Poitner was a dedicated and well-loved firefighter for his community for 18 years and actually fire captain for the last 4. Robert was seen as like a tough, manly guy, but deep down was a huge sweetheart, like a big teddy bear type. Robert was married to his high school sweetheart, Amy. Together they had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, Robert was unfaithful, and he was actually having an affair with a woman 18 years younger than him, 20-year-old Chasey. Robert's wife found out about the affair and left him. Not long after that, Chasey got pregnant, and then her and Robert married when Chasey was 22 years old and Robert was 40. The two were married for nearly 7 years, but as you can imagine, the relationship was very toxic and they argued all the time. Chasey felt like Robert did not love her, never loved her, still loved his ex-wife, and wanted to be with her instead. Chasey claimed that Robert wasn't attracted to her anymore because she lost over 100 pounds since they first got together, and he liked her a little bit more curvy. Chasey may have felt like her husband wasn't into her anymore, but she was definitely getting a lot of attention from other guys. While her husband Robert was working night shifts at the firehouse, Chasey started leaving their very young 4-year-old daughter alone at home during the night so she could go out to the club and be with other guys. Chasey started cheating on Robert with a lot of other men who were much younger than Robert. Robert caught her cheating and was going to divorce her, but decided to give Chasey a second chance. Robert actually took Chasey on this really nice beach vacation to Mexico so they could reignite the spark and fix their marriage, but while on this vacation, Robert caught Chasey texting and calling other men. Actually, when they got back from Mexico, Robert told some of the other firefighters that he was miserable and he was planning on ending things. He was going to file for divorce and was also planning on gaining full custody of their daughter because he had evidence that Chasey was leaving their daughter very young at the time home alone so she could go to the clubs and sleep with guys. And only 2 days after he told the people at the firehouse this, Robert was murdered. September 9th, 2016, Chasey calls 911 so frantic that she can barely even speak. When first responders found her, it was the middle of the night. Chasey was on this dirt back road in the middle of nowhere and her husband Robert was dead. This is what happened according to Chasey. I'm gonna try and go over this really fast because I want to put in as much police body cam footage in as possible. That night, Chasey said that she was supposed to meet her husband Robert at Jack in the Box for tacos. She made a wrong turn and got lost on this dirt back road in the middle of nowhere. And instead of turning around and trying to find a real road, because it was very obvious that the road that Chasey was on was a dirtback road in the middle of nowhere, it was more of like a hiking trail than anything. Chasey continued down the road until her Jeep got stuck in the mud. Chasey calls her husband to come and help her, and then right after her husband Robert gets there, Chasey claims that a man steps out of the darkness, he comes out of nowhere, then shoots and kills her husband Robert, and then just walks away and doesn't even try to shoot her.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep seeing his face.
Right.
We've been having problems, and I was coming to meet him at the Jack in the Box so we could talk.
Uh-huh.
We used to stop and get tacos at Jack in the Box when he'd come home late from work. When I went off the road, that's when I called him and I said, I need you to come help me. And he said, where are you? And I told him, I said, I'm on the dirt road. That's all I know. I don't know the numbers. And so I told him.
Breathe for me, Miss Pointer. Calm down and breathe for me, okay? I got some questions. I'm trying to fill in some holes, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever been out here before?
No. I've never been out here before.
Only tonight, right now?
Yes.
Right now, tonight?
Yes.
Have you ever driven down this road before?
No.
Not by yourself or with anyone? No. Let me ask you this, okay? And I need to be honest with me, okay? Were you out here with anyone else other than...
No, I was out here by myself. He backed my Jeep out. He moved it about 10, 15 feet from where it was to make sure that it was going to be okay. And he was going to drive around the corner. Mm-hmm. And then there was someone saying, there was a loud shot. There was a man. There's a tall person. That's all I know.
Okay.
He was taller than me.
And what was he wearing?
Dark clothes is all I know. Dark.
Did you see any type of firearm, rifle, or anything like that in his hands?
No. And the Jeep started rolling, and I didn't see anything, and I saw a shadow. That's all I saw. And when I walked up to him, I yelled his name, and I just felt something on me, and I had my phone in my back pocket, and I ran. I didn't know what else to do.
Interestingly enough, Chasey openly admits that her and Robert were having marriage problems, that he was trying to divorce her, and also that she was cheating on him with multiple men. Chasey even admitted that on that very day, she slept with 2 men that were not her husband. She was at one guy's house that morning, left that guy's house to go to another guy's house. His name was Michael Garza. Then she left Michael's house to go meet her husband. Chasey's story is so bizarre and unbelievable. The police do not believe her at all, so they bring her down to the station for interrogation, and within 2 hours, Chasey begins to crack. She said that the one guy that she was cheating on Robert with, Michael Garza, shot and killed her husband. But she claimed that she had no idea that Michael was going to kill her husband, that the plan was only for the 2 of them to confront her husband Robert because he was abusive. Michael went on the run and later turned himself in, and when he did, he had a completely different story than Chasey. He claimed that Chasey killed her husband Robert. He had no idea that she was going to do it, and he wasn't even there. He gave Chasey the weapon, but it was just for her to protect herself with because her husband was abusive. They tried to blame each other, but texts between them proved that they both planned this. All the men that Chasey was having affairs with all said the same thing, that Chasey told them that her husband Robert was really abusive and that she was scared for her life, and it definitely seemed like she was trying to bait someone into killing her husband for her. But I would like to point out that there's zero evidence that Robert was abusive towards Chasey. His ex-wife said that he was not a violent and angry man, and not a single person that ever knew Robert says that they believe this to be true. Not even Chasey's own mother believes that she was being abused by her husband Robert.
Robert and I have been having problems again, and he's gonna kick me out, and then he's gonna take Eisen from me again.
I talked to Robert yesterday.
I know. But he's still pushing me around.
He's not pushing you around, Jay.
Well, you don't live there.
People believe that Michael Garza's motive for killing Robert was that he had fallen in love with Chasey and thought that if he killed her husband for her, then she would want to be with him. I wonder what he thought when he found out that she was sleeping with another man that very morning. People believe that Chasey's motive was that she didn't want him to leave her and also didn't want him to take her daughter from her, and also because Robert had a very large life insurance policy. Michael and Chasey both pled not guilty, but were both found guilty. Michael was sentenced to 99 years in prison, and Chasey was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole hospital after 30 years. She still refuses to admit what she did and is still trying to appeal her conviction to this very day. Robert's life insurance policy was split between his 3 daughters, and both sets of grandparents helped raise Robert and Chasey's daughter, who was only like 6 years old when she lost both of her parents. Chasey has to be one of the most heartless and stupid criminals I've looked into in a really long time. It's very obvious that she didn't put that much thought into that bizarre story that she told the police on that body cam footage. And if you watched that in this video, thank you so much for listening to Robert Poytner's story. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. What did you guys think of that body cam footage? Have you ever heard of this case? And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And thank you to everyone that suggested this case, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video.
The thought of one of my children going missing and being kidnapped is unbearable, but this family had all 3 of their kids disappear on the same day, on what should have been a fun day at the beach, and the only clue they ever had was this sketch of the man who took them. In a matter of hours, 3 siblings just vanish into thin air, and then 7 years later, 2 more kids go missing under similar circumstances not that far away. Authorities believe the 2 are connected, and what's so incredibly disturbing is that whoever did this has never been caught. The list of suspects is very long, ranging from a child murderer who conducted horrific surgical experiments on his victims, to a pedophile who lived less than a mile away from where these 3 kids disappeared, known as the Satin Man. This is the mysterious and heartbreaking case of the Beaumont children, and whoever abducted them and likely murdered them has never been found, so let's talk about it. This is Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, who were 9, 7, and 4 years old when they suddenly and very mysteriously disappeared in 1966. They lived with their mom and dad, Jim and Nancy, in Somerton Park, South Australia, and they were a really loving and happy family. I mean, just imagine, you have 3 beautiful little kids and live in a safe neighborhood next to all of your friends. What more could you possibly want in life? The Beaumont children loved to go to Glenelg Beach in Adelaide, and it was pretty close to their house, so they went often. Glenelg Beach was already pretty popular, but on January 26, 1966, it was even more crowded than usual because it was Australia Day, the official national day of Australia, so kind of like a holiday. Just the night before, Jane, Arna, and Grant were dropped off at the beach by their dad before he took off for a 3-day business trip. But the next morning, which was Australia Day, the kids begged their mom to let them go back. It was a beautiful sunny day and really hot, so perfect for the beach, so their mom said yes. But since it was so hot, instead of walking like they would usually do, the kids took the 8:45 a.m. bus to Glenelg Beach. Their mom waved goodbye, not knowing this would be the last time that she would ever see her little babies. They were supposed to be coming back home on the noon bus, but the kids never came back. Nancy watched as the noon bus unloaded and then the 2 p.m. bus, but her kids were nowhere to be found, which was unusual because they pretty much always listened to their parents and came home when they were expected to. So freaking out, Nancy called Jim and told him that she didn't know where the kids were and to leave his work trip early, which is exactly what he did. When he got back, he drove down to the overly crowded beach and searched for his kids, but they weren't there. So Nancy and Jim scoured the neighborhood and their friends' houses to see if the kids were there, but again, the kids were nowhere to be found, and it was clear that something was horribly wrong. At 5:30 p.m., Jane, Arna, and Grant were officially reported missing to the Adelaide police. Authorities quickly set out to search Glenelg Beach and the surrounding areas, and they fully thought that they would find the kids alive and soon. They thought the kids just simply lost track of time, but they quickly learned that was not the case. Police expanded their search to the sandhills, the ocean, and all of the nearby buildings, and they issued heavy police presence at the airport, the train station, and all of the interstate roads. So this was a massive search, and if anyone had the kids, it seemed like they would soon be found. But sadly, that is not what happened. Within 24 hours, the entire nation knew of the Beaumont children's disappearance, and fears quickly spread that they had been kidnapped and murdered by a sex offender. This was a time where South Australia was really safe and everyone knew each other. So 3 young kids like this just vanishing off the face of the earth, it was extremely scary and a huge wake-up call. 3 days later, a woman came forward and told police that they needed to check the Padawalonga boat haven because she remembers talking to 3 kids who resembled the Beaumont children there at around 7 p.m. the night they disappeared. So police drained the boat haven in hopes that they would find something, but this turned up absolutely nothing. It was like the kids just vanished into thin air. Not long after they disappeared, several witnesses at the beach started coming forward and giving the same description of a man who they saw with the kids that fateful day. The kids had been spotted with a tall man with light brown hair, a thin face, and a thin athletic build. He was tan, likely in his mid-30s, 30s and he was wearing swim trunks. So many people came forward and said that the kids were seen playing with this man at the beach that day. They looked relaxed, like nothing was wrong, and like they were all having fun. From their descriptions, this composite sketch was made of the prime suspect in this case. This man even reportedly talked to one of the witnesses. He asked them if they had seen anyone near the kids' belongings because some of their money was missing. The man then walked away to change his clothes while all three of the Beaumont children waited for him. At around 12:15 p.m., witnesses saw Jane, Arna, and Grant leave the beach with this man. About 2.5 hours later, another witness saw the kids with the same man, who was holding an airline bag similar to one that Jane owned. When news of this unidentified man started spreading, the kids' mom Nancy couldn't believe it. She described all three of her kids as incredibly shy, but especially her oldest, Jane. Nancy said that it seems very out of character that they would be playing with a complete stranger like that. This led authorities to believe that the kids possibly met this man in their past visits to the beach, maybe even a few times, enough to groom them and get them comfortable enough to trust him. What's really odd though is that shortly before they disappeared, Arna told her mom that, quote, Jane got a boyfriend down at the beach, end quote. And at the time, their mom just thought that she meant a friend, and no one really thought much of it. But this comment really stuck out to the police after all three of them mysteriously disappeared. Adding to the weird circumstances around this case though was that shortly after this, the owner of Wenzel's bakery near the beach said that on the day of their disappearance, Jane came into the bakery. She bought some pastries and a meat pie with a $1 note. This also immediately stuck out to authorities and pretty much confirmed that the kids were in the presence of another person at the bakery that day. For two reasons, really. One was because the owner of Wenzel's knew the kids really well, as they would always come in, and never had they ever bought a meat pie before. And two, because when they left to go to the beach that day, their mom gave them just enough money for the bus fare and a small lunch. She gave them 6 shillings and 6 pence, not a $1 note. So this basically confirmed that someone else was with them and had given them that money. The very last possible sighting, and I say possible because the witness doesn't quite remember the timeline, was at 2:55 p.m. A local postman that knew the kids really well saw Jane, Arna, and Grant walking away from the beach along Jetty Road, which is in the direction of their home. He said they were all holding hands and laughing together, just walking. Postman later said that he couldn't remember if he actually saw them that morning or at 2:55 p.m. like he initially told police. But if it was 2:55 p.m., this was the very last time that they were ever physically seen. Over the next few years, the family would be subjected to other horrific things, like a psychic who was brought into the investigation by police to help search for the kids. The psychic told police to search this old warehouse that was near the family's home because they felt that the kids were buried there. It was excavated twice and thoroughly searched, yet no trace of the kids were ever found there. Then came the hoax letters. 2 years after the kids disappeared, their parents received 2 handwritten letters. One was supposedly from Jane and the other was from the man who said he was keeping the kids. The letters were postmarked from Dandenong, Victoria. In Jane's letter, she said everything was okay, that she and her siblings weren't going through anything bad, and she often referred to the man. And police initially thought that these letters were real because they compared this handwriting to Jane's old handwriting, and it was eerily similar. The letter the Beaumonts got from the man said that he was willing to hand the kids back to them, and he picked out a spot to meet up with them. When the date and time came to meet up, the Beaumonts went to the designated spot along with the police, but no one ever showed up. Not long after, the Beaumonts received a third and final letter from the man. He said that he knew the police were there and now decided to keep the kids because Jim and Nancy betrayed his trust. Like I said, police initially thought these letters were real, but in 1992, forensic examinations were done on the handwriting, which showed that the letters were a hoax. They found the author of them, a now 41-year-old man, but he was a teenager at the time the letters were sent in 1968. He confessed that he wrote these letters as a joke, which is unbelievably cruel to do to a grieving parent who just lost all 3 of their children at once. But in another turn of events, just 7 years after the Beaumont children disappeared, 2 more young girls would go missing as well. On August 25th, 1973, 11-year-old Joanne Ratcliffe and 4-year-old Christy Jane Gordon disappeared while watching an Australian football match at the Adelaide Oval. There have been so many searches for these girls, but they remain missing. This case became known as the Adelaide Oval abductions, and oddly enough, the 2 were last seen with a man who really resembled the man that was last seen with the Beaumont children. Because of this, police believe that these two cases are connected. Searches for Jane, Arna, and Grant continued for decades and are still taking place, but to this day, they have never been found. And although we don't know exactly what happened to them and who was responsible, there are a few theories, and more specifically, suspects. Suspect number 1 is Bevan Spencer von Einem. Bevan was a convicted child murderer who was sentenced to life in prison for the 1984 killing of an Adelaide teenager. Police believe that he's killed many more kids, and he eerily resembles the prime suspect in the Beaumont children case. Someone who's only been identified by the name Mr. B came forward and told police that he overheard Bevan bragging about having kidnapped 3 kids from the beach years prior. Bevan told him that he took the kids back to his house and conducted experiments on them. He said he performed a brilliant surgery on each of them and connected them up. One of them supposedly died during the surgery, so Bevan killed the other 2, and then he dumped their bodies somewhere in the bushland. Bevan also bragged about having been responsible for the 1973 Adelaide Oval abductions as well, and he matches the description for that prime suspect too. Bevan was known to go to Glenelg Beach pretty often to spy on kids in the changing rooms, and he also conducted disturbing surgical experiments on his previous victims. But at the time the Beaumont children disappeared, Bevan was in his early 20s, and the prime suspect was said to be in his mid-30s. The Beaumont kids were also younger than his typical victim profile, but everything else matches. There was also footage from the original search for the kids from a news station, and it showed a man who resembled Bevan amongst the onlookers. So it's a real possibility that Bevan was responsible, but police could find no physical evidence tying him to the crime, so he was never charged. As of today, Bevan is still alive and is 79 years old. Suspect number 2 is Arthur Stanley Brown, who killed 2 young sisters in Townsville, Queensland in 1970. They disappeared while walking to school, and they were found strangled to death in a dry creek bed a few days later. Arthur really resembles the prime suspect in the Beaumont and Adelaide Oval abduction case, but no connections were ever made tying him to the crime. The only thing police really had on him was a witness who claimed Arthur told them that he was in Adelaide on August 24th, 1973, which disturbingly was just one night before the Adelaide Oval abductions. But there was no evidence of him being in Adelaide in 1966, which is when the Beaumont children disappeared. Arthur was also 53 years old when they went missing, so well above the age range of the prime suspect. Arthur died in 2002. Suspect number 3 is James Ryan O'Neill. James killed a 9-year-old boy in Tasmania in 1975, and he reportedly told several friends that he was the one to kidnap the Beaumont children. His job at the time required him to pass directly through Adelaide, but again, no physical evidence was found tying him to this case. Police don't believe that James was responsible, but they can't 100% rule him out. Suspect number 4 is Derek Percy, a convicted child murderer who in 1969 took an insanity plea for an unrelated murder case. Derek had a psychological condition that could have prevented him from remembering his actions, and according to him, he was in the area when the Beaumont children disappeared, and he feels like he killed them, but he just couldn't remember. Derek was 17 years old when the kids went missing, so a little young to be the prime suspect. And police also don't know if he had a car back then, which the killer definitely needed for a quick getaway, and to later dispose of the children's bodies. Derek was in prison from 1969 until he died in 2013, so he didn't commit the Adelaide Oval abductions, which took place in 1973, and police believe that whoever kidnapped the Beaumont children also committed the 1973 abduction, so this kind of rules him out. Suspect number 5 is Alan Anthony Monroe. So another Alan McIntyre, came forward and told police that Alan Monroe came to his home in 1966 with Jane, Arna, and Grant's bodies in his trunk. Alan McIntyre's kids even saw the bodies in the trunk, but they reportedly mistook Arna for a boy because she had short hair at the time. So this led police to look into Alan Monroe, who was a businessman and former scoutmaster, who pleaded guilty to 10 child sex offenses dating back to 1962. In 2017, the Adelaide police were given a diary that was written in by several children, one of which being Alan McIntyre's son. The entries were all written in 1966, and they placed Alan Monroe in the vicinity of Glenelg Beach when the Beaumont children disappeared. This seemed like a huge lead, but again, no physical evidence ever tied Alan to this case, and he died in 2023. The 6th and final suspect is Harry Phipps, a local factory owner and then member of Adelaide's social elite. Harry first became a suspect in 2013 after this book was published, called The Satin Man: Uncovering the Mystery of the Beaumont Children. The book never officially identified who the Satin Man was, but after it was published, Harry's own son came forward and named him as the Satin Man. They called Harry the Satin Man because he had a weird fetish for satin. Harry also looked eerily similar to the prime suspect in the Beaumont case, and he was pretty wealthy and known to give something out. Can you guess what it was? $1 notes, just like what Jane was given that day. Harry was later outed as a pedophile, and he lived less than a mile from Glenelg Beach, where the kids went missing. His son was 15 years old at the time, and he later came forward and said that he saw Jane, Arna, and Grant in his backyard that day. It then came to light that Harry had paid 2 other kids to dig a hole in his factory yard that following weekend, which is pretty incriminating. In 2013, after the book was published and all this new information surfaced, one of Harry's factories that he used to own and where the kids dug that hole was excavated. A ground-penetrating radar found one small anomaly, which indicated movement or objects within the soil. So authorities continued digging, but literally nothing was found. They returned to the factory site in 2018 to excavate some more, and they spent a total of 9 hours digging for any sign of the kids. But again, no trace of them was ever found. They only found some animal bones. The site was searched one final time at the beginning of this year, which also turned up nothing. And to this day, Jane, Arna, and Grant remain missing. The disappearance of the Beaumont children is one of the largest police investigations in Australia, and it's also one of their most infamous cold cases. Their vanishing marked the end of innocence in Australian life. Nancy and Jim stayed in their Adelaide home for as long as they could because they couldn't bear to leave. They hoped that one day their babies would come back, and they never wanted to leave because how awful would it be for them to come home and not find their parents waiting for them. And the entire time they remained in that house, they never washed Grant's dirty handprints off the back door. It was their last reminder of him. Nancy died in 2019 at the age of 92, and Jim died in 2023 at the age of 97. They died never knowing what happened to all 3 of their little babies, which is one of the most upsetting things I have ever known. It's so hard to think about the fact that they disappeared on a really crowded beach, yet no one saw a single thing out of the ordinary, and I just cannot fathom even losing one of my kids, but all 3 at the same time, it's a sucker punch to the gut to even think about. But it's now been 59 years, and whatever happened to the Beaumont children and who was responsible remains a mystery.